I lost everything to the man I built an empire with. The night I hit rock bottom, shivering in the back seat of a repossessed sedan, a stranger knocked on my frosty window and handed me the keys to a $68 million fortune. But there was a lethal catch in our divorce settlement, a discovery clause. It stated that any undisclosed assets found within a year of the filing would be split 50-50. Jacob's lawyers had rigged the game, and I had exactly 6 months left to keep this fortune off his radar. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you sacrificed everything for? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Jacob stood there, tossing $500 through the gap in my window. "Buy a coffee, loser," he sneered. He did not know Miss Carmichael had just handed me the keys to his destruction. I stood in the kitchen of the Hamptons estate, my hands submerged in lukewarm water as I scrubbed a pan that did not need scrubbing. To the world, I was the broken ex-wife of a tech mogul, living in a house I could not afford to keep the lights on in. That was the plan. The truth was, this estate was no longer a marital asset. Miss Carmichael had quietly transferred the deed to a private trust in my name, making me the secret landlord of the very people who thought they were mocking my bankruptcy. 6 months of silence to protect a $68 million inheritance. It was a small price to pay, or so I thought, until the front door swung open and the vultures flew in. My mother, Jennifer, did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask if I was eating. She just walked to the granite island and ran a finger across the surface. "Madison, you missed a spot," she said, her voice dripping with that familiar, casual cruelty. My father, Christopher, followed her, his eyes already on the wine cellar key. And then there was Hannah, my younger sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life using my shadow as a footstool. "The engagement party is in 2 weeks," Hannah announced, tossing her designer bag onto the counter I had just cleaned. "Jacob says his partners expect the best. We need the $150,000 catering package, the one with the imported caviar and the vintage champagne." I looked at them, 3 people who shared my DNA, but not a shred of my empathy. They knew Jacob had stripped me of my company. They knew I was supposedly living on the edge of homelessness. And yet, here they were, demanding a fortune for a party. "I do not have that kind of money," I said quietly, playing the role I had been cast in for decades. "Do not lie, Madison," Jennifer snapped. "We know you have that secret consulting account. Family comes first. You have always been the responsible one, the one who cleans up the messes. Now clean this up. It is Hannah's big day." As I looked at their demanding faces, I realized why I was still standing there. This was the invisible chain of the survivor. For 20 years, I had been the family's silent investor. I was the one who paid the bills when Christopher's gambles failed. I was the one who funded Hannah's luxury lifestyle so she would not have to work. I had been conditioned to believe that my value was tied to my utility. In psychology, they call it learned helplessness. I was not a daughter. I was a high-yield asset they had already depreciated to zero in their mind. The hallway did not just smell like expensive candles. It smelled like the stale breath of parasites who had mistaken my silence for weakness. I had spent years in a house of mirrors, believing that if I just gave a little more, they would finally see me. But mirrors do not see you. They only reflect what you give them. "Fine," I said, my voice as cold as the Atlantic wind outside. "I will handle the deposit." They did not thank me. They just started discussing the guest list. I turned back to the sink, my mind already running the numbers. I was not just paying for a party. I was buying the front row seat to their ultimate bankruptcy. Every dollar they took from me now was another nail in the coffin. I was meticulously building for their reputations. The notification pinged at exactly 11:51 p.m. I was sitting in the dark of the study, the only light coming from the encrypted terminal Miss Carmichael had secured for me. The message was from an unknown number, Jacob's new fiancé. She was not sending a threat. She was sending a gift. It was a video file, 42 seconds of raw, unedited betrayal. I pressed play. The scene was the dining room downstairs. captured from the corner of the sideboard. My mother, Jennifer, was holding a crystal glass of the $300 Cabernet I had stocked just that morning. My father and Hannah were there too, their faces flushed with a kind of cruel joy they never showed when I was actually in the room. "She actually did it," Hannah giggled, waving her smartphone in the air. The deposit for the Hamptons Club cleared this afternoon. $150,000 for my dream night, and the idiot thinks she is doing it to save the family. "She has always been a useful little fool," my mother added, taking a long, satisfied sip of the wine I had paid for. "Jacob was right to strip her of that company. She is built for service, not for status. We just have to keep her believing we're her only allies for a few more months. Once the public offering bonus hits, we won't even have to look at her scuffed shoes anymore." I watched the video twice. My heart rate did not spike. My breath stayed perfectly steady. I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection or the heat of rising tears. Instead, I felt the clinical chill of an auditor discovering a massive case of embezzlement. My family was not a support system. They were a toxic liability I had been carrying on my emotional balance sheet for too long. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight, their credit had finally run out. Retaliation began at 11:58 p.m. This was not revenge, it was accounting. I opened my laptop, and the screen glowed with the cold, blue light of a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts and quiet retribution. First, the catering. I logged into the event portal and clicked cancel. $150,000 was instantly flagged for a refund to my secure proxy account. Next, the florist. Cancelled. The orchestra for the garden. Voided. I watched the numbers on my screen shift, the debt of their greed being wiped from my ledger. Then, I moved to the household management system. I had configured the smart hub for this estate myself under my fake caretaker alias. They were so blinded by their own perceived importance that they never questioned why the servant was the only one with the administrator encryption keys. I logged into the family office portal. As the primary administrator of the trust account that funded Hannah's emergency credit card, I had the ultimate kill switch. It took exactly 30 seconds to lock Hannah's secondary credit card, the one she had been using for her wedding emergencies. I set her daily limit to $0.00. Finally, I navigated to the security settings for the mansion. I revoked every single administrative access code tied to Jennifer, Christopher, and Hannah. I generated a new master encryption key and changed every digital door code in the estate. The locks clicked in unison throughout the house, a mechanical symphony of finality. By 12:00 to 3 a.m., the audit was complete. The people downstairs were still laughing, celebrating a $150,000 party that no longer existed in a house they no longer had the keys to. I shut my laptop. I was not the invisible sister or the compliant daughter anymore. I was the owner, and I had just closed their accounts for good. The silence of the estate was broken the next morning, not by the sound of the waves, but by the frantic vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It started at 7 a.m. and did not stop. Jennifer, Christopher, and Hannah were finally realizing the ground had shifted beneath them. The first voicemail from my mother was a masterpiece of manufactured outrage. Madison, the catering company, just called. They said the $150,000 contract was canceled. This is Hannah's engagement party. You need to call them and fix this immediately. I do not know what kind of game you are playing, but it is not funny. 10 minutes later, the tone shifted to cold venom. You are an ungrateful, pathetic child. After everything we have done for you, you are going to ruin your sister's life because of a little misunderstanding? You were always the difficult one. Fix this, or do not bother calling yourself a Hartfield ever again. I listened to her words with the detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. She was not shocked by what they had done. She was shocked that I had stopped playing my role as the silent, reliable victim. As I listened, I realized how we had gotten here. It was the trap of cruel normalization. In our family, toxicity had not been an accident. It was a system. They had spent 2 decades convincing me that their abuse was just family dynamics. When a group of people collectively decides that one person is a resource rather than a human being, Cruelty becomes an efficient business practice. They had normalized their parasitic behavior so thoroughly that they genuinely believed I owed them my life's work as a tribute for the privilege of being ignored. They did not see their mockery as betrayal. They saw it as their right. But I was done being the silent investor in their version of family. Anger was not loud this time, it was clinical. I did not return a single call. Instead, I initiated a professional escalation. I called Miss Carmichael's office. I needed a formal audit of the trust my parents had managed for me since I was 21, the one funded by my late grandmother. I already knew what I would find, but I needed the legal documentation to turn a family drama into a legal execution. The results came back in 2 hours. For 4 years, my father, Christopher, had been borrowing from my private fund to cover the gambling debts of my brother-in-law, Tyler. They thought I would not notice because I never complained about the modest return. I did not scream. I did not confront him at the front door. I simply instructed my legal proxy to draft a formal notice of restitution. I demanded the immediate return of $2,300,000, the principal amount stolen, plus 4 years of compounded interest. I sent the notice via a premium courier directly to my father's email and his physical address. The message was clear. This was not a family dispute. This was a criminal misappropriation of funds. I gave them 48 hours to initiate a repayment plan before I filed a formal police report. Inside my laptop, the screen no longer just glowed with facts. It hummed with the weight of the evidence that would finally dismantle their lives. The vultures were starting to realize that the cash cow they had mocked was actually the one who held their leashes. I did not think there were any more layers to their rot, but I was wrong. I sat in the blue light of my monitors, my eyes tracing the digital fingerprints left by 2 men who thought they were masters of the universe. Miss Carmichael's face appeared on my center screen, her expression as sharp and clinical as a surgeon's. "The deeper we go, the darker it gets, Madison," she said, her voice filtered through a secure line. "Jacob did not just steal your company to run a legitimate business. He and Tyler have been using your predictive valuation algorithm, the very code you wrote, to facilitate something much worse." She pushed a file to my terminal. I opened it, and the data spilled out in a cascade of red flags. Jacob and Tyler had established a series of phantom real estate projects across the state of Texas. On paper, they were elite developments worth tens of millions of dollars. In reality, they were nothing but ghost entries in a ledger. They were using my stolen technology to wash illegal funds through these investments, creating the illusion of high-growth assets to satisfy investors while the actual cash was disappearing into offshore accounts. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. My ex-husband and my brother-in-law were not just greedy. They were criminals. This was not a family drama anymore. It was a federal case. "There is more," Miss Carmichael continued. "Your parents, Jennifer and Christopher, are listed as primary signatories on the Delaware shell companies used for the transfers. They think they are silent partners in an elite investment club. They have no idea that their names are on every piece of evidence. Jacob used their greed to turn them into unwitting accomplices. Jacob had bribed them with monthly consulting fees to act as nominee directors. They signed every stack of papers he put in front of them, blinded by greed and the promise of a luxury retirement they hadn't earned. The realization hit me with the weight of a stone. My own mother and father had been so desperate to be part of Jacob's inner circle that they did not even read the contract. They had traded their integrity for the promise of a luxury retirement, and in the process, they had signed away their freedom. They were now legally tied to a massive money laundering scheme, and when the hammer dropped, they would be standing right under it. I leaned back in my chair, watching the server hum. I had spent 3 years writing that source code to solve financial puzzles, not to hide crimes. Jacob had severed the brain from the body of my company, but he had left the digital trails for me to find. He genuinely believed I was too broken to ever look under the hood again. "This changes the terms of our engagement," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. We are not just protecting an inheritance anymore. We are providing the state with a roadmap to their prison cell. I've been feeding the SEC and federal investigators encrypted data for weeks as a confidential informant. Tonight isn't just a party, it's a coordinated sting operation. This was not revenge, it was a final audit. The people who mocked my shoes and threw wine on my apron were about to discover that in the world of high finance, the person who understands the numbers always wins. I was not just a discarded ex-wife. I was the lead architect of their destruction, and I had all the receipts I needed to close their accounts forever. They expected caviar and vintage champagne. Instead, they got an iron gate and the sound of their own voices echoing across the driveway. I watched them through the high-definition security cameras: Jacob, Hannah, Jennifer, and Christopher. They were dressed in thousands of dollars of formal wear, looking ridiculous as they trudged up the private road because I had canceled their luxury car service hours ago. Hannah reached the gate first, her designer heels clicking frantically against the pavement. She grabbed the bars and shook them. "Madison, open this gate right now. We have guests arriving in an hour." She shrieked into the intercom. I did not answer with words. Instead, I activated the 100-inch outdoor media screen I had installed for their celebration. The screen flickered to life, the brightness cutting through the evening gloom, but it did not show a slideshow of Hannah and Jacob's romance. It showed the dining room from 2 nights ago. There they were, larger than life, my mother calling me a useful little fool, Hannah laughing about the $150,000 she had bled from my account, and my father nodding along. The audio was crystal clear. Every insult, every snide comment, every calculated act of betrayal played on a loop for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Madison, turn that off!" Jennifer screamed, her face contorting with a mixture of rage and sudden, sharp terror. I finally pressed the talk button. My voice was clinical, devoid of the heat they expected. "This is what we call the trap of normalized cruelty," I said, the speakers projecting my voice with lethal precision. "You spent years believing that because we shared a last name, you had a license to be monsters. You forgot that as the sole trustee of the Carmichael estate, I am your landlord, and your tenancy was legally terminated the moment you breached the trust's morality clause. You didn't break me. You just gave me a reason to conduct a final audit." Jacob stepped forward, his eyes darting around for a way in. "Madison, be reasonable. We can work this out. I have a public offering tomorrow. Think about the family reputation." "I am thinking about it, Jacob," I replied. "I am thinking about how the SEC handles a CEO who sells a company he doesn't own. You thought you moved the source code to a Cayman shell. You were right. You just didn't realize I've been quietly acquiring the defaulted debt of that shell for months. I didn't just buy it yesterday. I perfected the lien this morning. You are standing on a sidewalk in a borrowed tuxedo, trying to sell a hollow bauble." Panic finally replaced his arrogance. He looked at the others, his power flip complete. He was no longer the mogul, he was a cornered animal. Behind them, the low rumble of engines approached. 4 black SUVs with tinted windows rounded the corner, their blue and red lights beginning to pulse against the Hamptons' hedges. "That is not the catering staff, Hannah," I said as the federal agents began to step out of the vehicles. "Those are the federal agents from the Financial Crimes Task Force. And unlike me, they do not accept apologies." The scene at the gate turned into a graveyard for Jacob's ambitions. The federal agents moved with the practiced efficiency of a closing audit, their hands firm on the shoulders of the men who thought they were untouchable. Jacob struggled weakly, his face pale against the midnight blue of his tuxedo, while Tyler let out a guttural sound of pure terror. They were being detained for multiple counts of wire fraud and multi-million-dollar securities fraud crimes they had committed using the very technology they had stolen from me. Jennifer and Christopher stood paralyzed as the flashing lights illuminated their collective failure. My mother collapsed against the iron bars, her pink designer suit looking ridiculous as she began to sob. My father reached for the intercom, his voice cracking. "Madison, please. The second mortgage. We used the house as collateral for Jacob's shell companies. If the feds freeze those assets, we lose everything. We are your family." I looked at them through the lens of the security camera and felt a profound sense of finality. This was the moment their illusion of power finally met the reality of a zero balance. For years, they had operated under the illusion of the empty wallet. They believed their status was an inherent right, forgetting that their lifestyle was a luxury they had merely rented using my labor and my silence. When I finally closed the account, their entire social identity evaporated because they had no internal value to sustain it. They were not losing a daughter, they were losing a benefactor they had never bothered to respect. "You were never my family," I said, my voice projecting across the driveway like a final judgment. "Family protects, family supports. You exploited me, and then you mocked the person who was keeping you afloat. If you want your money back, I suggest you get in line behind the federal government." I turned away from the monitors, the screams at the gate fading into the background of my new life. I had just spent 5 minutes conducting the most important audit of my career. The result was a total liquidation of my past. I was letting go of the toxic weight of bloodlines to finally find myself. I realized that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is not to fix a broken relationship, but to recognize when the cost of maintaining it has become a bankruptcy of the soul. A sleek midnight black Maybach glided smoothly to the curb of the side exit where I waited. Miss Carmichael held the door open, a genuine smile touching her lips. "Your empire is secure, Miss Hartfield," she said. I stepped into the luxury of the leather interior, the door closing with a soft thud that sealed out the noise of their desperation. As we pulled away, I did not look back at the flashing lights or the crumbling remains of my parents' greed. I had $68 million, a restored legacy, and for the first time in 33 years, I was completely undeniably free. I have come to realize that the most dangerous place in the world is not a bleak parking lot in the middle of a winter storm. It is a dinner table where the people who are supposed to love you are busy calculating exactly how much they can take from you. I spent 33 years being the silent investor in my family's version of happiness. I thought my utility was my only path to their affection. I believed that if I just handled one more crisis or signed one more check, they would finally see me. But the truth is, you can never give enough to people who only value you for what you do and never for who you are. Looking back at the woman shivering in that repossessed car, I wish I could tell her that the cold was not her enemy, it was her awakening. If you find yourself in a similar situation right now, if you are the one always expected to clean up the messes while sitting at the spares table, please listen to me. Your worth is not a balance sheet for others to audit. You are the lead architect of your own reality, and you do not need their permission to build something beautiful. I used to think that cutting ties was a sign of failure. Now I know it is the ultimate victory. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes, it is the only way to set yourself free. It is about realizing that the phrase, "blood is thicker than water," is often used as a weapon by the very people who would stand by and watch you drown. My real inheritance is not the money or the technology empire I've finally reclaimed. It is the silence. It is the peace I feel sitting here knowing that nobody is waiting to mock my shoes or throw wine on my soul. I finally belong to myself. If you have ever had to find the courage to rise above a devastating betrayal, please share your story of resilience in the comments below. I would love to know how you found your way back to your own light. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that the best revenge is massive, undeniable success. Thank you for listening, and always remember, they can take your money, but they can never take your brilliant mind.